Hello, denizens of the internet. It's me. And on today's episode of Art Tips I'd Wish I'd Known When I Was 12, we're going to be talking about something I hate: line art. Specifically, how you never, ever, ever have to actually draw over your sketches because, if you're like me, you sort of loathe doing it. Before I start showing you this technique, quick disclaimer. There are plenty of reasons you might want to get good at line art, like if you want to work with other people in a studio animating, or you like the way it looks, or honestly, I guess it's probably a valuable skill to have in your skill set, I guess. But this video isn't about line art, it's about how to avoid it. Now, this technique is pretty simple, but was super revolutionary to me when I first saw it. So I guess the only reason I hadn't tried something similar before was that I'd watched a bunch of artists tell me that doing things like this look bad and unprofessional. The technique, and I'm sure you've guessed what it is because I'm doing it in the background, is just using a wider brush to sketch and then using an eraser to define. Here I'm using Photoshop and Kyle's Happy HB and Kyle's Eraser Natural Edge. I think you can download those from Adobe if you have Photoshop, but I'm fairly sure that the brushes don't matter too much because when I originally saw this technique, I learned it from Knits Art on Instagram when she was designing a tattoo for me, and she uses Procreate, so I think any sort of similar brush will work fine. Anyways, the key elements of the technique are really just a process of sort of sketching wide and then refining in with the eraser, instead of sort of making a general sketch and then moving over it with a smaller brush. You just sort of are moving everything onto one layer and sort of into one motion. And I think that the reason people sort of say not to do something like this is because I think they're afraid that when you don't have sort of one long line, or you're going back in with the eraser, you're losing some fluidity. But I think here that actually bringing in the eraser and the way that I'm refining, where I'm sort of using maybe longer strokes a little bit, although maybe not, does create lines that look pretty fluid, especially because you're sort of looking at the line in your sketch and then using the eraser to refine it. I think sort of the key to keeping it looking fluid is you're going to want to try and avoid exactly what I'm doing right there, which is making a bunch of little dots with the eraser. And also another thing I've done right there, which is leaving sort of like smudgy bits. I guess here you can see me coming in, trying to refine the stripes on the nose and sort of the inside of the nose here. I don't think I actually ever really get it, but you can see I'm sort of playing with as well, using the eraser to make the lines look hairy, which obviously you couldn't really get in a single line if you were just using a brush in Photoshop or, I don't know, whatever program of choice you use. Another thing that's really important to me when I'm doing this technique is just sort of letting go of the idea that I need to have a bunch of really sort of thin, precise lines, which are making up my sort of line art or whatever base I'm going to be coloring on top of, and just sort of really working with this sort of bigger and smaller type line feeling to try and get something that I'm happy with as a finished piece. And I think that that sort of maybe goes a little bit against some of what's super popular right now, where you have these very sort of thin lines defining stuff and then sort of color underneath. And so I guess that's another thing to think about is, you know, if your art style doesn't really, you know, fit the sort of super thin line mold, or, you know, the very precise line mold, really like not beating yourself up about that and like leaning into what you've got going on and what you actually sort of think is gorgeous about your art style, as opposed to sort of trying to make it fit exactly the mold of what you think, you know, a finished piece of art should necessarily look like. I think for me that really held me back from, you know, working with colors and, you know, trying to even create something that I would have considered finished, because I just didn't like the look of a lot of the finished pieces I was seeing on the internet. So here I guess I've started coloring the tiger, which is pretty exciting. So I guess I decided that that was what I thought finished was. And to get these colors, the couple that I'm experimenting with, I actually went to coolers.co, which is a great website which generates a color palette for you. I didn't end up using the color palette that I generated, but I used it as a jumping off point, and I thought it would just sort of show up here, but I guess actually I'm just recording only the Photoshop screen. So that's what my crazy mousing around right there is. And so I guess I started off sort of testing a blue, but I didn't really like the way that it looked underneath the lines. And so here now you can see I'm using the lasso tool, which I would definitely recommend. It's a great way to fill in your shapes quickly. And I'm experimenting with a couple of sort of other colors. Looking back on it, I actually think that this and the blue both looked better than the sort of, I guess I picked a little bit of like a dirty orange to go underneath. And I think that that ended up with it made the drawing look a little bit muddy. But here you can see that I'm experimenting with coloring sort of in a similar way to how I like to sketch, where I'm just sort of making very wandering lines and not necessarily staying as focused on keeping things exactly precisely to where they're supposed to go. I guess that check mark means I liked these colors together. But you can see instead of using the eraser to refine, I'm just sort of using the pressure sensitivity to dab in bits of color sort of all around the face and neck and give it stripes, sort of a striped feeling, while not necessarily following those stripes that I drew in the sketch, drawing, whatever you want to call it, sort of precisely. So now I'm bringing in some white into the eyes and nose and ears. I was looking at a reference for a tiger while drawing all of this, but I didn't sort of try and get the coloring super precise. I just sort of brought it in where I thought it would really accent the face and I don't know, you wouldn't call it a mane, but the chest area. As well as, just sort of experimenting now. I think that I'm on a separate layer from the under sort of orange and the first orange that I brought in. And then just bringing in a little bit of yellow for the eyes to really make them pop. That about does it for the technique I wanted to show you, which is wide brush and then erase back. And you can sort of see that here it gives you a different finished product than if we'd been using sort of line art, but it's definitely not a bad finished product, and I think can create a really gorgeous effect and might be able to help you out, if you're like me and you really don't love doing line art. So I guess this is the part of the video where I'm supposed to shove some art on screen and tell you that if you try this out, please let me know. If you liked it, leave a comment or a like or whatever it is people on YouTube do. Anyways, I guess thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.